I worked at a small grocery store, usually closing shifts. It wasn't a bad job, just repetitive. I'd clock in around 2 p.m., spend hours scanning groceries, wiping down counters, and dealing with customers, then clock out at 10 p.m. Most nights, I'd drive straight home to my small one-bedroom apartment. The store had its regulars. Some were friendly, some rude, and some were just there, coming in like clockwork. There was a man with a weird routine. Nobody knew his name, but everyone on the night shift recognized him. He always came in just before closing, grabbing random items, sometimes just a pack of gum, other times a single can of soup. He never said much, never smiled. He always looked tired, or at least that's how I explained it to myself. But looking back, I realize now, he wasn't tired. He was watching. That night wasn't much different from the others. It was 9:50 p.m. when he walked in, same old gray hoodie, hands shoved in his pockets. I was the only cashier on shift. I gave him a polite nod as he approached the register. He didn't respond, just placed a bottle of water and a pack of crackers on the counter. I scanned his items, gave him his total, and he paid. Cash, as always. He took his bag and left without a word. At 10 p.m., I locked up the store, did a quick cleanup, clocked out, and walked to my car. The parking lot was mostly empty now, except for one vehicle, his car. I hadn't noticed it before, but there he was, standing right outside it, not getting in, not looking at his phone, just standing there. His posture was rigid, his hands at his sides. He was staring at the store. I hesitated, my keys gripped tight in my hand. Maybe he was just lost in thought. Maybe his car had broken down. I got into my car and started the engine. As I backed out, I stole one last glance at him. He hadn't moved. I didn't like it. Something felt off. But I told myself I was overthinking it. I drove home. The following day was my day off, so I stayed up late, watching Netflix in bed. Around 1 a.m., just as I turned off the TV and snuggled under the covers, a bright light flashed through my bedroom window. Headlights. My heart jumped, but I brushed it off. Probably just a neighbor pulling into their driveway. A second later, the light disappeared. I didn't think much of it and let sleep take over. Then, in the middle of the night, I woke up suddenly. My mind was groggy, my body heavy, but something had disturbed me. At first, I thought I had heard my phone buzzing. I grabbed it from the nightstand. Nothing. No missed calls, no messages. That's when I noticed something strange. My bedroom door was cracked open. Barely an inch. I always closed my door. Always. A chill crawled up my spine. Maybe I hadn't shut it fully before bed. Maybe the wind from the AC pushed it open. But when I walked over and pushed it closed, it latched easily. Smooth. No resistance. It hadn't been left open accidentally. Something wasn't right. Then a terrifying thought hit me. The light. Had someone parked outside my apartment? Had someone been watching me? My stomach twisted with fear. Slowly, cautiously, I walked to the window and peeked through the blinds. A car sat in my driveway. I couldn't see the front of it, just the back half. But I knew, it was his car. Panic flooded my body. Someone was in my house. I turned back toward the bedroom door, my mind racing. Should I run? Should I hide? Should I call the police? I took a step toward my nightstand where my phone rested. And then I saw it, an eye, peeking from the thin gap in my closet door. For a second, my body refused to react. My breath hitched, my vision blurred, my chest tightened with pure terror. And then I ran. I bolted out of my bedroom, down the hall, straight out the front door, barefoot and in my pajamas. I pounded on my neighbor's door, breathless, frantic. Mrs. Daniels, an elderly woman who lived alone, answered after what felt like an eternity. Her eyes widened at the sight of me. "What's wrong, dear?" I stammered something about a man, about someone being inside my apartment. She pulled me inside, locked her door, and called the police. I stood there shaking, unable to stop looking at the front door, terrified that at any second he'd come bursting through. When the police arrived, they searched my apartment. The car in my driveway was still there, but the man, he was gone. Inside my bedroom closet, they found something that made my stomach turn. A crumpled up blanket, an empty water bottle, and a few food wrappers. He had been living in my closet, watching me, waiting. The police tracked the car to him, the man from the store. His name was Jordan Wells. I didn't know him. I had never spoken to him outside of my job, but he had been watching me for months. His car? He had parked outside my apartment many times before. The notes, the calls, the open door, all him. And the worst part, when they arrested him, he didn't even try to deny it. His response chilled me to the core. I wasn't going to hurt her, I just wanted to be close to her. I don't know what would have happened if I hadn't woken up that night, if his phone hadn't accidentally vibrated, waking me up just in time to see him. But I know one thing for sure. If I hadn't seen his eye in the closet, if I had simply rolled over and gone back to sleep, I might not be here to tell this story today. It all began about 3 or 4 years ago, when I had been working at my very first job for nearly 2 years. It was a hectic time. The small restaurant where I worked was purchased by a large company, so they brought in new managers, new procedures, and new waitstaff. That was the year I met 2 men who would forever change my life. One would become my boyfriend and my rock. The other would become my living nightmare. My boyfriend and I slowly grew closer over our long shifts, coffee breaks, and late-night conversations. He was gentle, funny, and as time passed, I fell in love with him without hesitation. Around this same time, another new manager arrived, a man I now refer to as POS. At first, I barely noticed him. He seemed friendly enough, telling jokes in the break room and encouraging teamwork. I left the restaurant for 6 months, but when I returned, the staff had almost entirely turned over. Only a few familiar faces remained, and among them was POS. In the following year, as I grew happier in my relationship, I also became something like friends with POS. But looking back, it was only ever a facade. He began paying me compliments, lots of them, and searching for my weak spots so he could patch them up with sweet words. He offered to buy me gifts, insisted that I pick up extra shifts with him, and seemed to latch on to every vulnerability I had. Before long, I started noticing strange inconsistencies in POS's behavior. He liked to brag about fights he'd been in and displayed an unsettling fascination with his weapons collection. Sometimes, he'd get an eerie look in his eyes, or his voice would drop to a strange low register. He'd make jokes about having different personalities. Masks, he called them, hinting that he wasn't always who he seemed to be. But in my weaker moments, I let my guard down. He made me feel special in a twisted, desperate way, and I did something I still regret. I listened to him. I let him manipulate me into sending him pictures that could destroy the relationship I valued more than anything in the world. Only after I quit the restaurant did the depth of his obsession become clear. One night, out of the blue, he bombarded me with messages. He demanded that I tell my boyfriend about us, threatening to expose my secrets if I refused. Suddenly, this man I had known as a coworker, maybe even a friend, was spewing venom and declaring he loved me all in the same breath. I tried to stay rational. I insisted there was nothing between us, that I was committed to someone else. That's when the name-calling and gaslighting started. He told me I was crazy, that I was the liar. Even as he begged me to say we were over, he wouldn't hear it. He just kept escalating. Then came the threats of violence. He spoke of justice, calling himself Jack the Ripper, promising he would come after me and my boyfriend if I didn't comply. I had never felt such crippling terror in my life. I sat alone in my room, crying, shaking, and feeling sick to my stomach. But as fear overtook me, I thought about the man I truly loved, my wonderful boyfriend who had stood by me through everything. I realized I couldn't hide this anymore. Summoning every ounce of courage, I marched into my boyfriend's room, sat him down, and confessed what I had done. To my relief and my disbelief, he forgave me. I don't think I've ever cried so hard in my life. Even now, I haven't entirely forgiven myself for how I hurt him, but I'm working on it. Once I revealed the truth to my boyfriend, POS lost his power over me. But instead of giving up, he threatened to sabotage my other job, where I worked with children, and even threatened to hack my PlayStation account. At one point, he demanded that I call him Jack or face the consequences. I blocked him on every platform, deleted my Facebook, and made myself a ghost to anyone associated with that restaurant. I spent an entire day talking to the police and the principal at my work. The police, though sympathetic, offered a small, chilling comfort. He'll soon find someone new to target. The next week, I was pulled over by the police because someone anonymously reported my car as being driven by a person drunk and on drugs. Of course, it was bogus. I explained the situation to the officer and gave him my case number. For the next few days, my phone rang 8 times a day from random numbers. But eventually, POS's harassment paused. Months passed, and I invested heavily in therapy to heal from this trauma. Then one day, fate seemed determined to test me again. While driving to a doctor's appointment, I pulled up to a red light, and my heart nearly stopped. The car in front of me was his. I recognized the make, the model, the color, and the silhouette of his profile. There was no easy way to escape. My hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone to call my mother. Terrified he would recognize me, I ended up taking 5 different turns to reach the clinic, parking in the most concealed spot I could find. Later that afternoon, I went to visit a friend, hoping to unwind by walking her dogs. But the moment we stepped out onto the sidewalk, I saw him again, crossing the street and heading toward us. I went cold. I didn't explain. I just tugged on the dog's leashes and rushed away, my heart pounding in my ears. 7 months have gone by since that day. Therapy has helped me regain parts of myself I thought were gone forever. And I've begun something important, reclaiming my space. I never considered myself an interesting person. My life was ordinary, even mundane. I worked as a graphic designer, lived alone in a small but comfortable apartment, and stuck to the same routine every day. Wake up, go to work, come home, cook dinner, watch TV, sleep. I liked it that way. Predictability was safe. I wasn't the kind of person things happened to. But I was wrong. Very, very wrong. One evening, as I walked home from work, I had the distinct feeling that someone was behind me. It wasn't anything obvious. No heavy footsteps or shadowy figures darting through alleys. Just a presence. I turned around, but the street was busy. People rushed past, caught up in their own lives. There was nothing unusual. I told myself I was imagining things, but the feeling didn't go away. A week later, I noticed him. It was at the coffee shop I stopped by every morning. He sat by the window, a man in his late 30s, average build, nothing particularly remarkable about him. Except for one thing. He was staring at me. I tried to ignore it, but over the next few days I saw him again, at the coffee shop, near my office, even at the grocery store. I convinced myself it was a coincidence. The city wasn't that big, people overlapped. But then one night, as I was walking home, I saw him again. This time, there was no mistaking it. He was across the street, partially hidden in the shadows, watching. I turned a corner quickly, heart hammering. I took a longer route home, checking my reflection in store windows to see if he was still there. I rushed inside my apartment, locked the door, and stood there for a long time, trying to calm my breathing. It was nothing, I told myself. It had to be nothing. 2 days later, I got a note, slipped under my door. "You have a beautiful smile." I froze, my fingers tightening around the paper. Maybe it was a mistake. Maybe it was meant for someone else. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. Because the second note came the next day. "I love the way you tuck your hair behind your ear when you're nervous." My stomach twisted. Whoever was leaving these notes knew me. They were watching me closely. I told my best friend Maya. She laughed it off. "Some guy has a crush on you. It's creepy, yeah, but not dangerous." But it felt dangerous. Then one night, a strange thing happened. There was a phone call. The first time my phone rang at 2 a.m., I ignored it, but it kept ringing, over and over. Finally, I picked up. Silence. Then, breathing. Not heavy or distorted like in horror movies. Just slow, steady, listening. I hung up, my skin crawling. The next night, the call came again, and the night after that, always silence, always breathing. I blocked the number, but the calls didn't stop. They just came from another unknown number. I called the police, but there wasn't much they could do. "There's no direct threat," they said. "Call us if something happens." I wanted to scream. Something was happening, but no one believed me. One evening, I came home to find my apartment door slightly open. My stomach dropped. I always locked it, always double-checked. I pushed the door open slowly, my breath shallow. Inside, everything looked normal. Nothing stolen, nothing out of place. Except for one thing. A single red rose on my kitchen counter. I stumbled back, my chest tightening. He had been inside, while I was at work, while I was gone. I called the police again. This time they took it more seriously. They checked the apartment, looked for signs of forced entry. Nothing. No broken locks, no windows tampered with, like he had a key. I changed my locks the next morning, but deep down, I knew it wouldn't stop him. He had already gotten in once. I bought a small security camera and installed it inside my apartment. I needed proof. That night, I barely slept. Every creak of the building made me jump. The next morning, I checked the footage. For hours, nothing happened. Then at exactly 3:12 a.m., the screen flickered, and suddenly, he was there, standing in my living room, not moving, not doing anything, just standing, watching my bedroom door, for 47 minutes. Then, just as suddenly as he appeared, he turned and walked out. I clamped a hand over my mouth, bile rising in my throat. I hadn't heard a thing, hadn't woken up. He had been inside my home for nearly an hour while I was sleeping. I called the police again, showed them the footage. This time, they finally believed me. They put extra patrols in my area. They checked with my building management, but no one knew how he got inside. I stayed at Maya's that night, too afraid to be alone. And that's when I got the final message, a text from an unknown number. I let you see me because I wanted you to. But now, the game is over. Don't try to find me, you won't. I dropped my phone, my entire body trembling. The police traced the number, but it was a burner phone. They never found him. Whoever he was, whatever he wanted, he was done with me. And somehow, that was worse, because I didn't know what changed. I didn't know why he stopped. I only knew one thing for sure. He had been watching me for a long, long time. I worked as a janitor at an old museum in my late 20s. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills. The building was massive, 3 stories of creaky wooden floors and dusty exhibits, and had been around since the early 1900s. They hired me to clean up after hours when no one else was there. At first, I thought it'd be peaceful. No crowds, no noise, just me and my mop bucket. But then they told me I'd have to work overnight shifts because someone quit unexpectedly. Apparently, no one wanted to stay alone in that place after dark. I didn't blame them. It felt like something out of an old horror movie, but I needed the money, so I said yes. The first few weeks were fine. I'd sweep the floors, dust the displays, and empty trash cans while listening to music on my phone. Sometimes I'd wander through the exhibits, staring at the old artifacts, faded photographs, rusted tools, antique furniture. It was kind of cool being surrounded by history, even if it did feel eerie sometimes. But then things started getting weird. One night, about a month into the job, I was cleaning near the second-floor gallery, a room filled with paintings from local artists. As I wiped down a glass case, I heard a sound behind me. It was faint, almost like footsteps, but slower, heavier. I froze, holding my breath, and turned off my music. Silence. Just the hum of the air vents. Probably just the building settling, I muttered to myself. Old places like this always made noises. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone or something was watching me. I finished up in the gallery and moved downstairs to the main hall. That's when I heard it again. This time, it was louder, a dragging sound, like someone pulling their feet across the floor. My heart raced as I spun around, shining my flashlight down the long corridor. Nothing, just shadows stretching along the walls. "You're imagining things," I whispered, trying to calm myself. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. Something was off. A week later, it happened again, only this time, I saw it. I was mopping near the entrance when I noticed movement out of the corner of my eye. I thought it was a reflection in the glass doors, but when I looked closer, I realized it was a person standing outside. A man, tall and thin, wearing a dark coat. He wasn't moving, he was just staring at me. I dropped the mop and stepped closer, squinting through the glass. Who was he? And why was he standing there in the middle of the night? Before I could figure it out, he disappeared. Not walked away, just vanished. One second he was there, the next he wasn't. I blinked hard, thinking maybe these were illusions and that I was exhausted, but the spot where he'd been was completely empty. That's when panic set in. I locked the door immediately, double-checking the bolt before heading back inside. For the rest of the night, I kept glancing over my shoulder, convinced he'd show up again. But he didn't. By morning, I was exhausted but relieved. Maybe it was just some random guy passing by. Weird timing, sure, but not impossible. The next night, though, everything changed. I arrived for my shift and started cleaning the same area near the entrance. Everything seemed normal until I noticed something strange. The lock on the front door was broken. Not forced open, just damaged. Like someone had tampered with it. My stomach churned. Had the man from last night come back? Was he trying to get in? I called my supervisor right away, but she brushed it off. "Probably kids messing around," she said. "Just keep an eye out and let us know if anything else happens." Easy for her to say. She wasn't the one stuck in the museum all night. As the hours dragged on, I grew more and more paranoid. Every little noise made me jump. Every shadow looked like it was moving. I tried to distract myself by focusing on my work, but it was useless. My mind kept going back to that man. Who was he? Why was he watching me? And then around midnight, I found the note. It was tucked under the edge of a display case in the main hall, a folded piece of paper, yellowed with age. My name was written on the front in shaky handwriting. My hands trembled as I opened it. "You shouldn't be here." That was all it said. 3 simple words, but they hit me like a punch to the gut. Who left it? How did they know my name? And what did they mean by "you shouldn't be here"? I crumpled the note and stuffed it in my pocket, too freaked out to think straight. I considered leaving early, but I didn't want to lose my job. Instead, I grabbed a chair and sat in the security office, keeping an eye on the cameras. If anyone came near the building, I'd see them. For the next few hours, nothing happened. The cameras showed empty hallways and silent rooms. Slowly, I began to relax. Maybe it was just a prank, some jerk messing with me. But then, just as I was about to call it a night, I saw it. On one of the monitors, a figure appeared in the main hall. It was him, the man in the dark coat. He was standing perfectly still facing the camera. His face was pale, his expression blank. For a moment, I thought he was looking directly at me through the lens. And then he raised his hand. He pointed, not at the camera, but at something behind it. Something off screen. That's when I heard the sound. Footsteps, heavy, slow, coming from upstairs. My blood ran cold. There was someone else in the building. Someone who wasn't on the cameras. I grabbed my phone and dialed 911, my voice shaking as I explained what was happening. The operator told me to stay put, that help was on the way. But I couldn't just sit there. I had to know who or what was upstairs. Against every instinct screaming at me to stay safe, I crept toward the staircase. Each step creaked beneath my weight, echoing in the silence. When I reached the top, I shone my flashlight down the hallway. And that's when I saw it. A trail of footprints. Fresh ones, leading straight to the storage room at the end of the hall. My legs felt like jelly, but I forced myself to follow them. The door to the storage room was slightly open, a sliver of light spilling out from inside. I pushed it open slowly, my heart pounding in my chest. What I found was a small window left open, swinging in the wind. It gave me chills because the building was tall enough that no one could jump from the window and just vanish. I came back downstairs terrified, heart pounding every second. I would glance back and expect someone or something following me. When I reached downstairs, the police has already arrived. They asked me about where specifically the threat was in the building because it was a large building. The police searched the building and found nothing. I asked the supervisor to change my shifts to daytime because I couldn't take it anymore. I still don't know who that person or thing was, but whenever I think about that night, I try to forget it because it scares me. It was just after 10 p.m., and I was alone in the back room of the grocery store where I worked. My coworker called out sick last minute, so it was just me for the night. Normally, we split up the overnight restocking duties, but now everything fell on my shoulders. To be honest, I didn't mind too much. Working alone meant no one was rushing me or micromanaging what I did. If something didn't get finished, who could blame me? The deliveries had piled up during the day, so there were stacks of pallets waiting to be broken down and sorted into carts. Each cart would then need to be rolled out to the aisles and stocked properly. It wasn't hard work, just tedious. I grabbed a box cutter and started slicing through the plastic wrap around the first pallet, humming quietly to keep myself company. The weather outside wasn't great. It was windy, and rain hammered against the metal roof above me. The sound echoed through the empty store, making it feel even quieter than usual. At least that's what I thought until I heard something else. A faint noise, like tapping, coming from somewhere near the front of the building. I stopped mid-cut and listened. Probably just the wind rattling something loose, I told myself. Or maybe a shopping cart had blown over in the parking lot. Either way, it wasn't worth worrying about. I went back to cutting open boxes, trying to ignore the nagging feeling that someone or something was out there. But then it happened again. This time louder, more deliberate, like knuckles rapping against glass. I froze, gripping the handle of the box cutter tighter. "Who's there?" I called out, though my voice barely rose above a whisper. No answer, just the steady drumbeat of rain hitting the roof. I decided to check it out. Leaving the half-unpacked pallet behind, I walked cautiously toward the front of the store. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting long shadows between the aisles. When I reached the checkout counters, I peeked down the main corridor toward the entrance. Nothing seemed out of place. The automatic doors were closed, and the parking lot beyond them was dark and deserted. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I'd missed something. Maybe it was just paranoia, but I wanted to make sure. As I stood there, staring into the gloom, I saw movement. Just a flicker at the edge of my vision, but enough to send a jolt of adrenaline through me. Someone, or something, was standing outside the glass doors. They weren't close enough for me to see clearly, but their silhouette was unmistakable. Tall, broad-shouldered, wearing some kind of hood. My heart pounded as I stepped closer, keeping my distance but squinting to get a better look. The figure shifted slightly, tilting their head as if they were studying me. Then, without warning, they turned and disappeared into the darkness. I exhaled sharply, realizing I'd been holding my breath. Was it just a passerby? Someone seeking shelter from the storm? Or something else? I locked the front doors just to be safe, even though they already had an electronic lock engaged. Feeling uneasy, I returned to the back room and tried to focus on my work. For a while, things were quiet. Too quiet. Every creak of the building made me jump. Every shadow seemed to stretch longer than it should. Then, about an hour later, I heard it again. Not just tapping, banging. 3 sharp knocks against the glass doors. This time, I didn't hesitate. I grabbed a flashlight and marched to the front of the store, determined to confront whoever was messing with me. As I approached the entrance, I scanned the parking lot. At first, I saw nothing. But then, out of the corner of my eye, I caught movement near the side of the building. There he was, the same figure from before. He was crouched low, almost hiding, but watching me intently. Our eyes met briefly before he bolted, disappearing around the corner. I followed him, stepping outside despite the pouring rain. The cold water soaked through my shirt instantly, but I didn't care. I needed answers. When I rounded the corner, I found him standing there, his face obscured by the hood of his jacket. In his hand, he held a crowbar. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice trembling. "You're trespassing." He didn't respond. Instead, he lunged forward, swinging the crowbar wildly. I stumbled backward, tripping over my own feet and landing hard on the wet pavement. He loomed over me, raising the weapon high, and then everything went black. When I opened my eyes, I was lying inside the store, surrounded by shattered glass. The alarm blared loudly, piercing my ears. My head throbbed and blood trickled down my temple. Confused and disoriented, I crawled toward the office and locked myself inside, dialing 911 with shaking hands. The police arrived quickly, their flashlights cutting through the darkness as they searched the premises. They found no sign of the man, though the crowbar was left behind near the broken door. "You're lucky to be alive," one officer said grimly. Whoever this guy was, he meant business. I used to drive a delivery van for a small local company. It wasn't glamorous, but it paid the bills, and I liked being out on the road instead of stuck in an office all day. After years of doing daytime routes, I switched to night deliveries. Fewer people around, less traffic, and no one rushing me. It felt peaceful. One night, around 2 a.m., I was making my last drop-off of the shift. The streets were empty, except for the occasional car speeding by, and the quiet hum of the engine kept me company as I drove through the dark neighborhoods. My final stop was at an old industrial park on the edge of town, a place filled with abandoned warehouses and dimly lit parking lots. Most businesses had moved out years ago, so it was rare to see anyone there after sunset. As I pulled into the lot, I noticed a figure standing near one of the loading docks. At first, I thought they might be waiting for me, maybe someone who needed their package early or got stranded, but something about them seemed off. They weren't moving much, just standing there under the flickering streetlight, staring straight ahead. I parked the van and grabbed the clipboard from the passenger seat. "Can I help you?" I called out as I stepped out of the vehicle. The person didn't respond. They didn't even turn their head. Weird, I thought, but maybe they had headphones in. I approached cautiously, squinting to get a better look. It was a man, tall and thin, wearing a long coat that looked too heavy for the warm summer night. His face was pale, almost gray, and his eyes were fixed on something far away. "Hey," I said again, louder this time. Still nothing. He didn't acknowledge me at all. Feeling uneasy, I decided to focus on my job instead. I went back to the van, loaded up the packages for the building, and dropped them off at the designated spot inside. When I came back outside, the man was still there, standing exactly where he'd been before. This time, I tried walking closer. "Are you okay? Do you need help?" Finally, he turned his head slowly toward me. His expression was blank, almost lifeless, but his eyes, they were sharp, piercing. For a second, I felt like he was looking right through me. Then, without saying a word, he took a step forward, and another. Before I knew it, he was closing the distance between us faster than I expected. "Whoa, hey," I stammered, backing away. "What do you want?" He stopped suddenly, tilting his head slightly as if studying me. Then, without warning, he reached into his coat and pulled out something shiny, a knife. My stomach dropped. I froze, unsure of what to do next. Should I run, yell, try to reason with him? But he didn't attack. Instead, he held the knife loosely in his hand, letting it dangle at his side. His gaze never left mine. We stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence broken only by the distant hum of electricity from the lamppost above us. And then, just as quickly as he'd appeared, he turned and walked away. No explanation, no threat, just gone. I watched him disappear into the shadows, clutching the clipboard tightly in my sweaty hands. Shaken, I climbed back into the van and locked the doors. As I drove away, I couldn't shake the image of his hollow eyes and that knife. Who was he? What did he want? Why didn't he hurt me? When I got home, I called the police and reported the encounter. They promised to send a patrol car to check the area, but deep down, I knew they wouldn't find anything. By morning, the whole thing would feel like a bad dream. A week later, while reviewing security footage from the industrial park, they had cameras, though I hadn't known it, I saw myself pulling into the lot. Everything seemed normal until the very end of the tape. Right before the feed cut out, a figure appeared behind me as I loaded the packages. It was him, the same man. Only this time, he wasn't alone. There was someone else with him, partially hidden in the darkness. Someone smaller, holding what looked like a stuffed animal. To this day, I don't know who they were or why they followed me. Wondering why they didn't attack me. Maybe they were here for someone else. I work as a community patrol officer in a quiet suburban neighborhood on the outskirts of Phoenix. My job isn't glamorous. It's mostly about keeping an eye out for unlocked gates, broken streetlights, or kids sneaking into pools after hours. It's not dangerous work, and I like that. I'm just a regular guy in his late 20s trying to make ends meet. The shifts are long, 8 p.m. to 3 a.m., but they're peaceful most nights. Occasionally, I'll deal with rowdy teenagers loitering at parks or someone forgetting to lock their garage, but nothing serious ever happens. That changed last Thursday. It started like any other night. Around 10:30 p.m., I was doing my usual rounds through one of the gated communities I monitor. Everything seemed normal until I passed by the small playground near the center of the neighborhood. Out of the corner of my eye, I noticed a man sitting alone on one of the swings. He wasn't swinging. He was just sitting there, completely still, staring at the ground. At first glance, he didn't look threatening, just a guy in jeans and a hoodie. But something about him felt off. Maybe it was how late it was, or maybe it was the way he didn't move when I drove by. Either way, I decided to keep an eye on him as I finished my route. By midnight, I looped back around to check if he was still there. Sure enough, He hadn't moved. The swing swayed slightly in the breeze, but otherwise, he was frozen in place. This time, though, I noticed something new, a backpack lying at his feet. It looked heavy, stuffed full, and oddly out of place for a random guy hanging out at a playground in the middle of the night. I slowed down and rolled down my window. "Hey," I called out, trying to sound casual. "Everything okay?" He turned his head slowly toward me, but his face stayed hidden under the shadow of his hood. For a moment, he didn't respond. Then, in a low, flat voice, he said, "Do you know where Elm Street is?" His tone sent chills down my spine, not because it was aggressive, but because it was so eerily calm, like he was reading lines from a script instead of asking a real question. "Sorry, I lied. I knew exactly where Elm Street was. It was only a few blocks away, but something told me not to tell him. Instead, I added, you might want to try checking your phone or GPS." He didn't reply. He just stared at me for what felt like forever before turning back to face the empty playground. Weirded out, I drove off, glancing at him in my rearview mirror until he disappeared from sight. For the next hour, I tried to shake the encounter from my mind, but no matter how hard I focused on my routine, I couldn't stop thinking about that guy. Who was he? Why was he carrying such a bulky backpack? And why did he need directions to Elm Street? Eventually, curiosity got the better of me. I typed the address into my GPS and headed toward Elm Street myself. When I arrived, it looked like every other street in the neighborhood, quiet, dimly lit, lined with identical cookie-cutter houses. Nothing seemed unusual. I parked across from one of the homes and waited, telling myself I was being paranoid. After all, what were the chances he'd show up here? But less than 5 minutes later, I saw him walking down the sidewalk, heading straight for the house directly across from me. My stomach dropped. It was definitely the same guy. The hoodie, the backpack, the slow, deliberate gait. He stopped in front of the house, glanced around cautiously, and then knocked on the door. No one answered. After waiting a minute, he knocked again, louder this time. Still no answer. Then, without hesitation, he reached into his pocket, pulled out what looked like a set of tools, and began fiddling with the lock. That's when panic hit me. Should I call the police? What if he heard me talking on the radio? What if he ran before they arrived? My mind raced as I debated what to do. Before I could decide, the front door creaked open and he slipped inside. I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of my car, heart pounding. I knew I should have called for backup immediately, but I couldn't just sit there while someone broke into a house right in front of me. I crept up to the driveway, listening for any sounds coming from inside. At first, everything was silent. Then, suddenly, I heard muffled voices, angry, urgent voices, and the unmistakable sound of furniture being shoved aside. Before I could react, the front door flew open, and the man burst out, sprinting past me like a bat out of hell. In his hand, I caught a glimpse of something shiny, a knife. Adrenaline surged through me, and I shouted, "Stop!" But he didn't even glance back. He vanished into the darkness before I could process what had happened. Shaking, I called 911. While I waited for them to arrive, I cautiously entered the house. The living room was trashed, chairs overturned, pictures knocked off the walls, but there was no sign of anyone else. Just as I was about to leave, I heard faint groaning coming from upstairs. I followed the sound to a bedroom, where I found a man lying on the floor, clutching his side. Blood seeped through his fingers, staining his shirt crimson. His eyes widened when he saw me, and he gasped. He took the box. "What box?" I asked, kneeling beside him. But before he could answer, his eyelids fluttered shut and he passed out. When the paramedics arrived, they rushed him to the hospital. The police searched the house but found nothing unusual. No signs of forced entry, no missing valuables, nothing that explained why the intruder had targeted this specific home. Later, detectives pieced together some details. The homeowner, a retired mechanic named Jim, had recently come into possession of something valuable, a rare coin collection worth thousands of dollars. According to his wife, he kept it in a locked safe hidden inside a closet upstairs. But when officers checked the safe, it was empty. Jim survived the attack, but he couldn't remember much about the intruder beyond the fact that he'd been wearing a hoodie. As for the coins, they were never recovered. To this day, I can't stop wondering, how did the man know about the coins? Why did he choose that exact night to strike? And most importantly, where is he now? It was the summer after graduation, and I had just started working at the local library to save up for college. My parents were visiting relatives out of state, leaving me alone in our quiet suburban home for the weekend. At 19, being alone wasn't scary. It felt like freedom. No curfews, no questions, just me and an empty house. On Friday night, I decided to grab dinner from a burger point about 10 minutes away. The streets were nearly deserted, which wasn't unusual for this part of town. But as I drove back, something caught my attention. A car with its headlights off trailing behind me. I thought maybe they were broken or the driver forgot to turn them on. Then it hit me. Why would someone drive without lights unless they didn't want to be seen? I sped up slightly, and so did the car. My heart began pounding. Was I overthinking? Maybe it was just another driver taking the same route home. To test my theory, I took a random turn onto a side street. The car followed. That's when panic set in. I gripped the steering wheel tighter, my mind racing through possibilities. Should I call the police? What if it's nothing? Would I look ridiculous calling 911 because some guy forgot his headlights? But what if it wasn't nothing? The car stayed close, matching my speed perfectly. I made another turn, then another, trying to lose them, but they stuck to me like glue. By now, I was certain they weren't just driving aimlessly. They were following me. Finally, I headed toward my neighborhood, hoping familiarity would give me some advantage. As I turned onto my street, I felt a wave of dread wash over me when the car turned too. It parked right outside my driveway while I pulled in. My hands trembled as I killed the engine. Through my rearview mirror, I watched the driver sit there, not moving, just staring. I fumbled for my phone, ready to dial 911, but hesitated. Maybe I could confront them, show I wasn't afraid. After all, I had pepper spray in my bag. Not much, but better than nothing. I stepped out of my car slowly, clutching the pepper spray tightly in one hand. "Can I help you?" I shouted, trying to sound braver than I felt. No response. The figure inside the car shifted slightly, leaning forward as if adjusting something. Then suddenly, the engine roared to life, and the car sped off down the street, disappearing into the night. Relief flooded through me, but only briefly. Something about the way they left felt wrong. Like they weren't giving up, they were retreating temporarily. Shaken, I locked myself inside the house and double-checked every door and window. Everything seemed secure. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I grabbed a kitchen knife, not because I planned to use it, but because holding it made me feel safer, and stationed myself by the living room window, peeking through the blinds. Minutes passed. Nothing happened. Maybe they really were gone. Maybe I'd scared them off. I started to relax, convincing myself it was probably just some drunk driver messing around. But then I heard it, a faint creak from upstairs. My blood ran cold. There was no wind tonight, no reason for the house to make noise. Slowly, I crept toward the staircase, gripping the knife so hard my knuckles turned white. Each step creaked under my weight, echoing louder than I wanted. At the top of the stairs, I paused, listening. Silence. Maybe I imagined it. A loud bang came from my bedroom. Someone or something had slammed against the door. I bolted back downstairs and dialed 911 with trembling fingers. "There's someone in my house," I whispered, tears streaming down my face. "Please hurry." While waiting for the police, I hid in the coat closet, clutching the knife and praying the intruder wouldn't find me. Every second felt like an eternity. Finally, flashing red and blue lights illuminated the windows. I heard heavy boots stomping up the stairs, followed by shouts of "Police!" Summoning every ounce of courage, I opened the closet door and stumbled outside. 2 officers stood in the hallway, looking confused. One held a flashlight, the other a baton. "What happened?" I stammered. They exchanged glances. "We searched the entire house," one of them said. "There's no one here." "No one?" I repeated, incredulous. "But I heard banging. Someone was upstairs." They nodded sympathetically but insisted the house was empty. Before leaving, they advised me to install security cameras and offered to wait until I felt safe enough to stay alone again. As I locked the door behind them, I noticed something strange on my bedside table. A crumpled receipt from the burger place I'd visited earlier. Except I hadn't brought it inside yet. It had been sitting in my car's cup holder, and written on the back, in shaky handwriting, were 3 words: "You shouldn't have run." About 8 years ago, I worked as a security guard at an old cemetery on the outskirts of town. The job wasn't glamorous, but it paid well enough to cover my bills, and honestly, it was peaceful most nights. My main responsibility was driving around in my truck, making sure no teenagers were sneaking in to drink or vandalize headstones. It wasn't exciting work, but I liked the quiet. One night, everything changed. It started like any other shift. I clocked in at dusk and began my usual rounds, circling through the rows of graves with my headlights cutting through the foggy darkness. Around 2 a.m., I noticed something unusual, a faint light flickering near the back corner of the cemetery. At first, I thought it might be moonlight reflecting off one of the tombstones, but as I got closer, I realized it was coming from a small lantern sitting on the ground next to a fresh grave. I parked my truck and stepped out cautiously, gripping my flashlight tightly. As I approached, I saw that someone had left flowers and a stuffed animal on the grave. Nothing seemed out of place until I noticed the dirt. There were strange marks in the soil, like someone had been digging with their hands. Not deep, maybe just a few inches, but enough to make me uneasy. I radioed my supervisor to report what I'd found. He told me to take photos and secure the area while he contacted the groundskeeper to check if this was some kind of maintenance issue. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. This wasn't normal. The next morning, things got worse. When I arrived for my shift, my boss pulled me aside and told me the grave had been disturbed again, this time more violently. Someone had dug deeper into the earth, almost like they were trying to uncover the casket. What made it even creepier was that the grave belonged to a young woman who had died tragically in a car accident only weeks earlier. Her family visited often, leaving fresh flowers every few days. Whoever was doing this wasn't just targeting any grave, they were going after her. For the next week, extra guards were brought in to patrol the cemetery 24/7. We split shifts, keeping constant watch over the grave. Nothing happened during those days. No disturbances, no signs of anyone lurking around. Everyone started to relax, assuming it was a one-time act of vandalism or maybe even a prank gone too far. But then, on my first solo shift after the others left, it happened again. I was halfway through my patrol when I decided to double-check the grave. It was late, close to 3 a.m., and the air was thick with silence. As I drove past the rows of headstones, I caught movement out of the corner of my eye. A shadow darted between 2 large monuments, disappearing before I could get a good look. My heart raced as I grabbed my flashlight and stepped out of the truck. Slowly, I moved toward where I'd seen the figure, shining my light across the uneven ground. Everything looked still and undisturbed until I reached the grave. There, kneeling beside the headstone, was a person dressed entirely in black. They wore gloves and a hoodie pulled low over their face, obscuring their features. Their hands were buried in the dirt, clawing at the earth with frantic urgency. For a moment, neither of us moved. Then, sensing my presence, they froze. "Hey!" I shouted, my voice echoing in the empty cemetery. "What are you doing?" The figure bolted upright, turning to face me for a split second. In the dim glow of my flashlight, I couldn't make out much, just wide, panicked eyes staring back at me. Then they took off running, disappearing into the maze of graves. I chased after them, adrenaline pumping through my veins, but they were fast. Within seconds, they vanished into the shadows, leaving me alone amidst the silent tombs. Breathing heavily, I returned to the grave and shone my light on the damage. The hole was deeper now, almost big enough to expose the top of the casket. Scattered around the site were scraps of paper, notes, torn photographs, and what looked like pages ripped from a journal. That's when I noticed something chilling. The name on the headstone matched the handwriting on the scattered papers. The vandal wasn't just attacking the grave, they were destroying mementos left by the grieving family. I called the police immediately. While waiting for them to arrive, I gathered the torn items, hoping to preserve whatever evidence I could. By the time officers showed up, I was shaking, not from fear, but from anger. Who could do something so cruel? Over the next few days, investigators pieced together part of the story. The vandal turned out to be the victim's estranged ex-boyfriend. According to interviews with his friends and family, he had struggled to cope with her death, blaming himself for their breakup shortly before the accident. The notes and photos he destroyed were ones she had written to him during their relationship, which her parents had placed on the grave as a tribute. He was eventually caught. During questioning, he confessed to everything, claiming he wanted to erase all traces of her memory because it hurt too much to remember. It was a twisted, selfish motive, and hearing it only deepened my disgust. Last summer, I decided to take a solo trip to Portland. It wasn't anything fancy, just a long weekend getaway, but it was the first time I'd ever traveled alone. Growing up, vacations were always family affairs, cramped cars, shared hotel rooms, and endless compromises about where to eat or what to do. This time, though, it was all mine. No schedules, no sibling squabbles, no one else's preferences to consider. Just me. I scrolled through Airbnb listings for weeks before settling on a cozy little cabin tucked into the woods just outside the city. The photos showed rustic charm, exposed wooden beams, a stone fireplace, and large windows overlooking towering pine trees. Best of all, it was affordable. Sure, it was farther from downtown than I'd hoped, but I didn't mind the drive. Solitude sounded perfect after months of working overtime in a noisy office. The owner sent me the door code the day before my arrival, along with instructions on how to use the keyless lock. When I pulled into the gravel driveway late Friday afternoon, the place looked even better in person. The air smelled fresh, like earth and pine needles, and the only sounds came from birds chirping overhead. For the first time in ages, I felt completely at peace. After hauling my suitcase inside, I locked the door behind me and took a quick tour of the space. The kitchen was small but stocked with essentials, the bathroom had fluffy towels, and the bedroom boasted a plush king-sized bed that practically begged me to lie down. But instead, I flopped onto the couch in the living room, turned on the TV, and let out a deep sigh of relief. 10 hours of driving had left me exhausted, and within minutes, I drifted off to sleep. When I woke up, the sun had dipped below the horizon, casting the room in shadows. My phone read 9:45 p.m., and the faint glow of the TV illuminated the otherwise dark space. I stretched, grabbed a bottle of water from the fridge, and headed toward the bedroom. That's when I noticed it. The front door was wide open. It had me shaking in my boots. I could have sworn I locked it when I came in earlier. Maybe I forgot? No. I remembered punching in the code and hearing the soft click as the deadbolt slid into place. There was no way I'd left it unlocked. And yet, here it was, gaping open like an invitation to whoever, or whatever, might be lurking outside. Adrenaline surged through me as I tiptoed over to the door. The cool night air brushed against my skin, carrying with it the faint scent of damp leaves. I peered outside, scanning the darkness for movement, but saw nothing. Still, something felt wrong. Like I wasn't alone. I closed the door quietly, locking it this time, and grabbed a heavy flashlight from the counter. If someone was inside, I wanted to be prepared. Room by room, I searched every corner of the cabin, flipping on lights and checking closets. Nothing seemed out of place. No signs of forced entry, no missing items, no intruder hiding under the bed. Everything appeared normal. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Too wired to sleep, I texted the homeowner to ask if anyone else might have access to the property. A cleaning crew, a maintenance worker, anyone. He replied almost immediately, assuring me he was the only one with the door code and promising to look into it further in the morning. His response calmed me slightly, but not enough to stop my mind from racing. Eventually, I crawled into bed, clutching my phone like a lifeline, and tried to will myself to sleep. It didn't work. Around midnight, I heard it, a faint creak coming from somewhere near the living room. I told myself it could be the foundation settling, but then came another sound, footsteps, slow, careful, and unmistakably human. My pulse thundered in my ears as I lay frozen beneath the covers. Was someone in the house? Had they been there the whole time, or had they broken in while I slept? The footsteps grew louder, moving closer to my bedroom door. I fumbled for the lamp on the nightstand, switching it on to chase away the oppressive darkness. Then, gripping the flashlight like a weapon, I crept toward the door. Just as I reached for the handle, the footsteps stopped. Silence fell over the cabin, so thick it felt suffocating. I held my breath, straining to hear anything beyond the pounding of my own heart. Seconds ticked by, each one stretching endlessly, until finally I mustered the courage to yank the door open. The hallway was empty. Relief washed over me, but only briefly. As I stepped into the living room, I spotted something that left me frozen in fear. The front door was open again. Wide open, just like before. This time, I didn't hesitate. I bolted outside, shouting into the darkness, "Who's there? Show yourself!" No answer, just the rustling of leaves in the wind. I called the police, pacing nervously while I waited for them to arrive. They searched the property thoroughly, shining flashlights into the woods and checking every inch of the cabin, but they found nothing. No footprints, no fingerprints, no evidence of anyone having been there at all. By the time they left, dawn was breaking, painting the sky in shades of pink and orange. Exhausted and shaken, I packed my things and checked into a hotel for the rest of my stay. The homeowner offered a full refund, apologizing profusely and insisting he'd never experienced anything like this before. He even sent a security team to inspect the property, but they couldn't find any vulnerabilities in the locks or doors. What haunted me most wasn't the idea of an intruder. It was the realization that whoever it was had been inside while I slept. They'd walked past me, seen me vulnerable and unaware, and done what? What had they wanted? Why hadn't they confronted me? To this day, I don't know who it was or why they targeted me. All I know is that I'll never book another Airbnb, not unless I'm absolutely certain I won't be alone. It was supposed to be a quiet stopover, just one night in a modest Airbnb before I continued on to my main destination. The house sat at the edge of a sleepy neighborhood tucked away from the main road. It looked unassuming, clean and cozy, exactly what I needed after hours on the highway. I pulled into the driveway around 7 p.m., grabbed my bag, and stepped inside. The place smelled faintly of fresh paint, and everything seemed tidy enough. I locked the door behind me out of habit, though the neighborhood felt safe. After checking each room quickly, I dropped my things by the couch and sank onto it, exhausted. My phone buzzed with notifications, but I ignored them, letting myself drift off for a moment. That's when the knock came. 3 sharp raps against the front door jolted me awake. Confused, I glanced at the clock. It wasn't even 8 yet. Who could possibly be here? I crept toward the door, heart already racing. Through the peephole, I saw 2 men standing outside, their faces shadowed under the dim porch light. One of them shifted impatiently, while the other leaned closer to the door. "Hello," I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. "We're here for the Airbnb," one of them said, his voice low but firm. My stomach tightened. "What do you mean?" "This is our booking for tonight," he replied, sounding annoyed now. "Can you open up so we can figure this out?" I hesitated, gripping the edge of the doorframe. There had to be some kind of mistake. I double-checked the confirmation email on my phone. It matched the address perfectly. "No, this is my reservation," I said loudly through the door. "You need to contact the host." For a second, there was silence. Then I heard murmured voices, too soft to make out clearly. One set of footsteps retreated down the porch steps, leaving only one man lingering near the entrance. He knocked again, more gently this time. "Look, can we talk about this face to face? We don't want any trouble." Something about his tone made my skin crawl. Maybe it was the way he emphasized "we." Or maybe it was the fact that I was alone, miles from anyone who knew where I was. Whatever it was, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was very wrong. "I'll call the owner," I lied, keeping my voice steady. "Just give me a minute." Before he could respond, I backed away from the door and peeked through the small window next to it. That's when I froze. Standing near the car parked in the driveway was another figure, not one of the men I'd seen earlier. This person wore a hoodie pulled tight over their head, face obscured, and beyond them, barely visible in the darkness, were more shapes moving slowly along the side of the house. My breath hitched. How many people were out there? I ducked back into the living room, adrenaline coursing through me. They weren't guests. This wasn't a mix-up. Something far worse was happening. Without wasting another second, I grabbed my phone and hurried into the bathroom, locking the door behind me. My hands trembled as I dialed 911. "Emergency services. the operator answered calmly. "There's someone trying to break into my Airbnb," I whispered, pressing myself against the wall. "There are multiple people outside, and I think they're trying to get in." "Stay quiet and stay safe," she instructed. "Help is on the way." As I crouched on the cold tile floor, I heard muffled voices outside growing louder. A loud thud echoed through the house, the sound of someone testing the front door. Another crash followed, and then the unmistakable splintering of wood. They were inside. Panic clawed at my throat, but I forced myself to stay silent. Footsteps moved swiftly through the rooms, accompanied by the clatter of drawers being yanked open and furniture shoved aside. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to fight, to do something, but I stayed frozen, clutching my phone like a lifeline. Suddenly, the bathroom doorknob rattled. I held my breath, praying they wouldn't try harder to get in. After what felt like an eternity, the handle stopped moving, and the footsteps receded. But relief didn't last long. From somewhere deeper in the house, I heard glass shattering, a window maybe, and the unmistakable scrape of boots climbing in. Then, finally, sirens wailed in the distance. The intruders must have heard them too, because chaos erupted. Heavy footsteps pounded across the floor, doors slammed, and within moments, the house felt eerily silent. I stayed huddled in the bathroom until I heard shouting outside, police officers announcing their presence. Only then did I dare to unlock the door and step out. The scene was surreal. Drawers were emptied, cushions slashed, and shards of broken glass glittered on the carpet. My suitcase lay overturned in the corner, its contents scattered everywhere. Outside, police lights flashed against the trees, illuminating officers speaking with neighbors who had gathered to gawk. An officer approached me, his expression grim. "They fled before we arrived," he explained. "We've been dealing with similar incidents lately, groups targeting vacation rentals. They usually take whatever valuables they can grab and leave without confrontation." He assured me they'd increase patrols in the area, but his words offered little comfort. As I stood there, shaking and disoriented, I realized how close I'd come to something truly terrible. Whether their intentions were malicious or not, the fear they left behind lingered long after the incident ended. Even now, months later, every creak of a floorboard or unexpected knock sends a shiver down my spine. Staying in unfamiliar places used to feel like an adventure. Now it feels like tempting fate. Some scars heal quickly, but others, like the memory of those footsteps closing in, stay with you forever. I never thought running an Airbnb would lead to anything more than a little extra cash. Sure, it was stressful at times. Cleaning schedules, late-night messages, the occasional broken appliance, but I always told myself it was worth it. My wife and I owned a cozy little house near the beach, perfect for vacationers looking to escape their routines. The money wasn't life-changing, but it helped pay off some debts and kept us comfortable. For 2 years, everything went smoothly. Most guests were polite, leaving behind nothing worse than a messy kitchen or misplaced remote control. But one weekend changed all of that. It started like any other booking. A young couple named Sarah and Jake booked the place for 3 nights. They seemed normal enough. Nice profile pictures, decent reviews, and they paid up front without issue. On Friday evening, as usual, I texted them the door code once they arrived. A few minutes later, I got a reply. "Thanks, everything looks great, that was it. No problems, no questions." I relaxed on my couch, glad this part of the day was over. But around 10 p.m., just as I was about to turn in, my phone buzzed again. This time, it wasn't a text, it was a call from Jake. Calls weren't common, so my stomach tightened before I even answered. "Hey," he said when I picked up. His voice sounded rushed, almost nervous. "Sorry to bother you, but the electricity's out." "What?" I sat up straight. "Are you sure? Did you check the breaker box?" "We did," he replied quickly. "It's not that. Nothing works. Not the lights, not the fridge, not even the outlets." This didn't make sense. The power company hadn't notified me of any outages, and the house was equipped with solar panels as backup. Still, I couldn't ignore the problem. If the electricity really was out, I needed to fix it, or at least figure out what was going on. "I'll come take a look," I said reluctantly. "Give me 20 minutes. When I pulled into the driveway, something felt off. There were no cars parked outside except mine. At first, I figured they must have walked somewhere nearby, but then I remembered how far the nearest store was. Why would they leave in the middle of dealing with an electrical issue? I knocked on the front door before punching in the code and stepping inside. The house was eerily quiet. No TV humming in the background, no faint sound of conversation, just silence. "Hello?" I called out. "Jake? Sarah?" No answer. Shaking off the unease creeping up my spine, I headed toward the utility closet where the main breaker panel was located. Maybe they hadn't flipped the right switches. As I opened the panel, though, everything looked fine. All the breakers were in place, and there were no signs of damage. Confused, I flipped the main switch off and back on again. Instantly, the hum of electricity returned. Relief washed over me, at least until I realized no one had come to check if I'd fixed the problem. Where were they? I wandered through the living room, calling their names again. Still nothing. Then I noticed something strange. The sliding glass door leading to the backyard was slightly open. Cold air seeped in, carrying the faint smell of salt water from the ocean. Pushing the door open wider, I stepped onto the deck. The moonlight illuminated the empty yard, casting long shadows across the grass. Something about the scene made my skin crawl. I turned to go back inside, but as I reached for the handle, I heard footsteps behind me, heavy ones. I froze, heart pounding. Slowly, I turned around. 3 men stood there, silhouetted against the dim light spilling from the house. None of them looked like Jake or Sarah. "Everything okay?" one of them asked, his tone casual but his expression unreadable. Yeah," I stammered. "The power's back on. Who are you guys?" They exchanged glances, and for a moment, nobody spoke. Finally, the same man shrugged. "We're friends of Jake's. He asked us to stop by." Friends? Jake hadn't mentioned anyone visiting. And why were these men standing in my backyard instead of inside the house? Before I could ask more questions, another voice cut through the tension. "Dude, let's just go," one of the others muttered, shifting uncomfortably. He glanced toward the street, as if expecting someone or something to appear. The leader shot him a sharp look but nodded. Without another word, they brushed past me and disappeared into the darkness. I stood there for a full minute, trying to process what had just happened. When I finally went back inside, I double-checked every room, half expecting to find them hiding somewhere. But the house was empty. Back home, I told my wife everything. She insisted we call the police, which we did. Officers arrived within the hour, searching the property thoroughly. They found no trace of the men or of Jake and Sarah. In fact, when they reviewed the security footage from the cameras I'd installed months earlier, they discovered something chilling. The couple who had supposedly checked in earlier that evening didn't exist. Their photos were stock images, and the credit card used to book the stay was stolen. What scared me most, though, was what the officers uncovered next. Hidden beneath the sink in the guest bathroom was a small duffel bag filled with tools, lockpicks, wire cutters, even a crowbar. Whoever those men were, they hadn't been planning to rob the house. They'd been preparing to break into other houses. To this day, I don't know why they let me leave that night. Maybe they panicked when I showed up unexpectedly, or maybe they decided I wasn't worth the risk. Either way, I haven't rented out the house since. Some things just aren't worth the trouble.